Okay, now that was a great presentation. First, I'd like to just point out a few people in the crowd, just so you know. I know you've met a lot, but we got some of the House leadership here, Representative Fred Doucette and Jim Kofalt. Thanks for coming. Everyone here is either a state rep, a former state rep, or a future state rep.
One of them, right? Yeah, I like that. Yeah. So, I heard they're very well paid, actually.
Yes. Some of them are overpaid. The Democrats. And I would just like to point out a couple of the other people in the leadership here. We have my favorite state senator, Ruth Ward, here. Thank you, Senator. Very instrumental in education savings accounts.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And also the vice chairman, the new vice chairman. He's actually newer to his job than I am by about 15 minutes. Vice chair of the state party, Ryan Terrell. Ryan. And he's a millennial also. And for you millennials, a lot of us boomers, we were actually at the speech with Martin Luther King. It was very moving. So I'd just like to kick it off. We do have two of our college Republicans in the back with microphones. To speak, please raise your hand and let them hold the mic in front of you if you can, or else pass it to you. And the one thing I'd ask you is, this is not an opportunity for you to give a speech. I would just hate to tell you, but we really don't care what your speech is. We want to hear from Vivek. And that's a very good natured just way to say, so we can get as many people as possible to ask questions. But I'll just lead it off with, you know, we've got the Larry Fink, woke, ESG, corporate push, and you know, we look at all these folks in DC that are potentially running our country. And sometimes people say, what can I do? What can I do? I'm just an average citizen in New Hampshire. What can I do? What are your suggestions for what average people can do to help the situation?
So I think first is education and self-education, okay? Knowledge is power. Okay, there's you know, long story about Frederick Douglass, actually, who taught himself how to read. That was his ticket out of slavery. What I see today in America is a form of not just psychological slavery, but even financial slavery. One of the things I told people, this is my day job at Strive, what I told them is, here's 5 questions you can ask your financial advisor. For example, ask them, was my money used to vote for a racial equity audit or an emissions cap? Was it used to vote for executive compensation targets for CEOs that include ESG goals rather than just financial goals? Was it invested in funds that systematically divest from firearms, from oil and gas, from coal? I'm not even telling you what to do. I'm just saying, get the answers, right? Knowledge is itself empowerment. That's the first step. And people don't realize this. You do vote every day with your dollars. Whether you know it or not, you're casting that vote. Now, it's not just the financial markets, though. I think it's even in our culture. The ask that I would make of every one of you, okay, is when you find yourself in a room where you believe you're the only person who believes what you do, I think you have a civic obligation as an American today to speak your mind without apology. If you do that, I will make a commitment to you in return. The commitment I will make to you, you come find me if I'm wrong about this, is that you will discover you were not the only person in that room who believed what you did. Things I talked about up here, basic American rules of the road, merit, free speech, recognizing China as a threat, needing to declare independence. The people we elect to run the government should be the ones who run the government. These are not partisan ideas. I know I was referring to the conservative movement. Forget my references to the conservative movement. Forget the GOP. These are just basic American rules of the road. And you know what? I don't care if you're black, white, gay, straight, Democrat, or Republican. My question for you is, do you agree with these basic principles? Because if you do, I'm on your team. And you know what I think? I think most Americans do. I think most Americans, I think most of you believe your neighbors and your colleagues and your teammates believe these things to be true as well, but you can't be sure because you feel like you're not allowed to talk about it. So the first step is solving the free speech problem is actually just to start talking openly again. And I'm optimistic that if we can take down those false silos that we've created, the silos of speech, then we're actually on the doorstep of an American revival that in retrospect will make us laugh at this moment that we were in. That we weren't in some inevitable national decline like Rome or Carthage or whoever else. That we were just really a little young, going through our version of adolescence, figuring out who we really are, but still able to come out stronger on the other side of it. But it's not going to happen automatically. It's going to happen if people like you in this room live out your civic obligation by, at the very least, educating yourself and speaking your mind. And I think if we do those things, I'm actually very optimistic that not in some cheesy politician kind of way, but like in a real, just in a true way, that I think our best days as a country are really, actually, still ahead of us. But it's going to take people living up to it to make it happen.
Great, thank you. Okay, yes ma'am, in the back.
Hi, thank you for taking my question.
Get grab the mic, he's right behind you.
Thank you for taking my question. My name's Renee. I don't know what woke means. What's the definition? The term is kind of generic. I kind of have an emotional feeling of what it might be. Could you please explain that to me?
Thank you. It is something we ought to do better in our movement, is to define the terms. And I could do the same thing for ESG or anything else if you guys want to talk about this. But woke is what you asked about. So I'm not going to define this in critical terms. I'm going to define it in neutral terms that anyone on any side of a debate can agree with, okay? Being woke refers to waking up or becoming alert to invisible societal injustices and then taking action based on your awareness of those previously undiscovered societal injustices. It's like the equivalent of string theory in physics. It says that there's these invisible strings that govern the relationships between objects in the universe. The theory of wokeness has a view of a social string theory, that there are invisible social relations and hierarchies and power structures that are not just governed by money, that was the Marxist worldview, but that are governed by other genetically inherited characteristics. And whether or not we all know it, the 150 of us in this room, we're all taught, tightly taught, that kind of taught, in an invisible power struggle with one another. And that the parameters that determine whether we're higher or lower on that chain are our race, our sexual orientation, and our gender. So being woke refers to now seeing that reality, and the promise of the woke religion is that once you see it, you cannot unsee what you have come to know. It's neutral terms. Proponent or opponent, that's what it's about. Now, I think that there's some version of this that begins in a good place, okay? The belief that there's a history of injustice that we have to understand and reckon with if we are to move forward, okay? I don't think that it starts in a good place in the top-down version of it, but sort of in the millennial Gen Z version of it. I think it actually, especially the Gen Z version, it comes from a good place. But the problem is that it's just a symptom of this deep hole, this black hole of a void in our heart, okay? And I'll tell you how I feel as a millennial, maybe it's how most of us feel, is we're just like blind bats flying in a dark cave, lost trying to find our place and locate ourselves. Bats are blind, you do it through sonar, you send out a signal, and then you locate yourself by seeing what bounces back. That's the role of faith, patriotism, family, standing institutions, unshakable realities for most of human history. Aristotle talked about it's every bit as true in his era as it is today. This is how we deduce our identity, who we really are. But when those pillars disappear, what the woke faith offers is a substitute. It's not real, it's artificial, it's made up. But if we're not getting the signal from the real thing, we're going to take it from the fake thing instead. And then we become addicted to it. It becomes an addiction. And so what do? We tell this generation that you have this moral hunger, all right? But the way you satisfy it is you go to Ben & Jerry's and order a cup of ice cream with some social justice sprinkles on top, not realizing you can't satisfy moral hunger with fast food. You did that for a few years, but where are we now? That effect is starting to wear off. Young people in this country are recognizing that they're still hungry for something else because you can't satisfy moral hunger with fast food. We need more substantial fare. And that is the opportunity for this movement. I don't think we're going to get it for long, but the moment is open now to fill that void with something else. We can either keep doing what we've been doing, myself included in this, by the way, criticizing the social justice sprinkles, writing books and showing up on Fox News, and I think spotting the problem is part of it, being self-critical here. But I think we can now rise to the occasion to actually fill that void with the vision of American national identity that runs so deep that it then dilutes the woke poison to irrelevance. That's the opportunity. The question is whether we rise to the occasion to do it.
Okay. Great. Let's see. Oh, where's my mics? Let's get Leah. Question for Leah.
So something that scares the life out of me is this combining of what you can and can't say with tech and government power, and that is a central bank digital currency where they can literally reach into, shut off my bank account if I criticize the government. I mean, we saw them do it up in Canada. Is there any way that that can be derailed? You're a money man.
Yeah, I mean, you want me to take a tech? I mean, I hope people don't get bored by this stuff. I can talk about it. I can. Stop me if I'm going on too long, because I can go. I love this stuff. So, I mean, I don't really love. I love the topic. I don't love the substance of it. So she's using the term central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. Okay, it's a new movement that calls for the digitization of currency, the end of cash, the paper cash. And the call for doing it in the United States is that other countries, principally China, are actually doing it. So the argument goes that China's turning the yuan into a digital currency. Well, if China turns the yuan into a digital currency, then that means that the US dollar, if it needs to keep up, needs to switch to digital status. I have so many problems with this, but I'll try to go through just a few of them, okay, with problems with this argument. First is China's doing it for a reason. It's a social credit system, okay? There's no distinction in China between the amount of money you earn through their non-capitalist system of wealth accumulation and standing up to the Chinese Communist Party. You do the wrong thing in China, say the wrong thing that Xi Jinping doesn't like. It's like you're in an arcade, except the arcade is the bank account, and they deduct some points from your account. That's what they can do with the digital currency. That's why China's doing it. So why on earth would we want to imitate that mechanism unless we actually wanted to do the same thing ourselves in this country? I say, hell no, run the opposite direction. Now, there's a couple of other things going on. There's also flawed premises even baked into the argument. Two more, I'll stick to two more false premises, and then we can move to another question. False premise number one is that this would somehow result in a weaker dollar. Actually, I think if the rest of the world goes to centrally banked digital currencies that allow central governments to reach into your pocket and deduct money from your bank account because they don't like what you said or what you did, then it might be more valuable to hold a dollar that wasn't vulnerable to the same form of interference. So the idea that this economic theory that we just got to keep up with the Joneses, where the Joneses are really the Jinpings, is a flawed piece of logic. And then that gets into a whole separate discussion that we could have, or maybe save for another day, which is the fetishization of the strong dollar itself, which is actually a feature of monetary policy in this country that, you know, I think that creates an artificial demand for the dollar when it's the reserve currency of the world. Where all else equal, I'd still rather it be the reserve currency of the world, but actually systematically disfavors U.S. exporters over importers by making our actually goods more expensive relative that we export rather than the ones we buy for no fault of actually manufacturers in the US, but just a fault of the way the currency markets have recalibrated against the backdrop of an artificially buoyed dollar. And I like a strong dollar that's organically strong, but not one that's artificially buoyed to that status. And so just on so many levels is this argument for centrally banked digital currencies, the central banking digital currencies in the US a bad idea. It's a road to perdition. But the way you know we shouldn't have even taken the first step is that the whole argument was predicated on the fact that China was doing it and we needed to do it to keep up. That should tell you all you need to know. Yeah, we can stop it. I don't think it's good. I mean, I don't, the more, back to education as a solution, the more people are educated about this, the more this doesn't have a chance under God's green earth to happen in America. And not by something to do with it.
So, Vivek, with Larry Fink and BlackRock,
Yeah.
and the ESG scorecards, do you have any like examples of bad things that have happened because of corporations not following these Larry Fink promoted rules, or is that still in its infancy? I do see it in some of my reports when I say vote not to do these things.
Well, I'll just give you a couple examples to make it real. Okay, so Apple last year had a shareholder proposal from a group and an advocate that said they wanted to have Apple conduct a racial equity audit. Apple's board, and by the way, this is not some sort of, conservative, right-wing extremist company here that we're talking about. It gave, 9-figure donation to BLM just a couple of years ago. But Apple's first response was no, actually, because if you're a technology company in the US, you have one competitive advantage, it's your talent and your ability to hire the best possible engineers. They said, we don't want to do a racial equity audit, whatever that means. Well, it turns out that, nonetheless, BlackRock, State Street, and other financial institutions used our money, collectively, to tell Apple that, no, you're going to do that racial equity audit. They voted in favor of it anyway. What does Apple's board do? They then conduct that racial equity audit. Now, Xiaomi, who's the biggest smartphone producer in China, who BlackRock's a shareholder of, I don't think they're doing their racial equity audit over there, actually. I think they're competing with Apple just fine. Well, Apple conducts its racial equity audit. Is that a one-off example? No, it's not. Home Depot, same thing, racial equity audit 2022. Management didn't want to pursue it, the board didn't want to pursue it, large financial institutions forced them to anyway. It's not just to the sphere of race or hiring practices. They take the Scope 3 emissions cap at Chevron in 2021. And this is where I'm going to make it real, because it affects any small business owners in this country, in the state. Anyone here is consider yourself a small business owner in this state? A good number of people in this room. So, again, back to my rule of thumb. The more boring the term sounds, the more you have to pay attention. Okay? You hear the term Scope 3, you're going to be hearing that word a lot more in the next couple of years. Mark my word on that. There was a proposal for a Scope 3 emissions cap at Chevron, major American oil company. What did that say? It says that not only do they have to reduce their own emissions, that's Scope 1, but that they have to also reduce emissions of anyone in their entire supply chain. That includes a customer or a supplier, even if you're a small private business, in their supply chain. They are then enforcing on you your own emissions cap. Chevron's board said, no, we don't want to do this. Nonetheless, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard use your money, our money, to force Chevron to do it by voting in favor of those proposals, which effectively applies the kind of pressure that requires the company to bend the knee. What does that contribute to? That contributes to higher prices at the pump. I mean, anybody notice we had a little bit of an energy shortage in this country, higher prices at the pump over the last year? It is not an accident that it happens in part because of this ESG force being implemented through capital markets. So on one hand, you're paying for $5 gas at the pump last year. On the other hand, what you didn't know is your 401k account was actually being used to give you that $5 gas at the pump. And so who's literally left holding the bag? It's Americans who are left holding the bag, which, as I said earlier, the project that Chevron is then forced to drop are picked up by the likes of PetroChina, who doesn't apply those emissions caps over there. And then if you had one final doubt as to what was really going on here, what's the agenda that's really at work, the thought I'll leave with you on this topic is the climate change movement actually has nothing to do with the climate. If it did, this ESG movement would actually be embracing nuclear energy, the best known system, best known form of energy, carbon-free energy production known to mankind, and yet Vanguard's ESG funds, for example, systematically exclude nuclear energy companies from their fund basket. Now, why would that be? It's because nuclear energy, not that it's not good enough, it might just be too good at addressing the problem on its own terms. And then what happens if we actually solve the carbon-free energy production problem without actually having achieved global equity, which is really what this was about, making the West, America included, apologize for its sins from epochs past. And so the E, S, the G, E stands for environmental, S stands for social. The E is really just a Trojan horse for the S. The climate change movement is just a vector, it's a vehicle, it's a Trojan horse for doing what some angry teenager, you could listen to her on a given day, will tell you. She says that she's more honest about it than the rest of them, says that actually this isn't about just the climate, it's about colonialism, it's about social injustice, it's about more than just the climate. She's right. She's actually at least saying what she's thinking, it's on the mind of the rest of this movement, is that it's a vehicle for advancing a social agenda that that we would never have accepted if we said it was really about equity. So we're going to make up a new religion and say it's about the climate instead. That's what's really going on. Thank you.
Crop TV.